Well, and then the bottom line is there's actually an article, you can probably still Google it and find it. It said, second time winners, something about a lonely breed unless you happen to be a rock star. Okay. And there was a national study done to see in races where the same two opponents had ran for the same position a second time against each other, and unless there were major mitigating circumstances like somebody caught selling drugs or something like that, there had been, I don't think there had ever been a case prior to the race that I had where the same two opponents ran and then the other person won. And the reason they said that, that second time opponents are, a lonely breed unless you happen to be a rock star, they pulled in the Elvis show, and so that's where where it came in.
You got to hit on that. So a lot of people may not know this, but you kind of are a rock star. You performed on Letterman.
I've been on the Letterman show, Oprah, Joan Rivers, Entertainment Tonight, Access Hollywood. Opened up for Kenny Rogers, Conway Twitty, Loretta Lynn.
Holy smokes.
Debbie Boone and I did a concert together in Louisville. I used to tour with Wolfman Jack.
Wolfman Jack.
Yeah, that's right. His real name is Bob Smith, actually.
Oh, that's
in fact,
amazing.
He and I were the first time we performed together was in the Virgin Islands. His real name is Bob Smith, and one night we were out eating at a place called The Wreck on the island of St. Croix, which was named after a shipwreck that had occurred just off the coast. And I said, Wolf, and his nickname for me was Monk. And
was Monk?
Monk, because he said I was the most conservative entertainer he had ever met in his life, so he called me Monk. And but I asked him, I said, Wolf, how is it that you ended up, becoming Wolfman Jack? And he goes, well, Monk, he goes, it's like this. He says, it loses something when you go, hey, this is Bob Smith. Woo! And so anyhow, but he went with the stage name Wolfman Jack. And then he did you've heard of the Hanna-Barbera cartoon empire.
Yeah, Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, the Flintstones, the Smurfs, all those. Yeah. I actually, Joe Barbera, who was the creator of a lot of these characters and had several Oscars on his mantle, a friend of mine who worked with him, he's since passed away, but they asked me if I would come do a karaoke party at their mansion out near Beverly Hills. And so I did, and it was, in fact, he and I did the Scooby-Doo song together. I sang it as Elvis, and he sang along with me.
So you, because you skipped this part, you are an Elvis impersonator.
Yes,
right?
yes.
You're an Elvis impersonator. So you've traveled the world and done a lot of things, but it's always impersonating Elvis.
Always. In fact, I've done over 6,000 shows.
Holy smokes.
Yeah.
So how do you become a good Elvis impersonator? Like what sets you apart from I'm sure there's hundreds, if not thousands of other Elvis impersonators out there. Like what makes a good Elvis impersonator? Why are you so popular?
Well, I think a large part of it is, as vocally, you have to really key on the vocals, and then a large part is to be a real person, meaning that, it's like, I'm not going to get out there and go, thank you very much, and all this stuff. I do the singing, obviously, but I have a full band and so forth. But I think what's really worked out well, just like with Wolfman Jack, in fact, he had told me one time when we were touring, we ended up doing the Virgin Islands together with the Warner Theater in Las Vegas. I was up at a show he did in Chicago called the Ravinia Fest, which is like Deer Creek, that type of thing. And anyhow, he said, I really like you as a person. And so I think a lot of it, and like when I was backstage with Loretta Lynn, we actually had a Bible study before the concert started there at the Illinois State Fair in Du Quoin. And I think a lot of it has to do, and she was a very dear sister in Christ, wonderful person. But I think a lot of it has to do with just being a real person with these people.
Wow.
Just and in fact, Wolfman and I, one of the last conversations we had was about Christ.
That's amazing. He passed away, right?
He did. Yeah. He was in his probably 56, 57, and I remember on the island of St. Croix.
He was only 56 or 57?
Yeah, he wasn't very old at all, and we were down on the island of St. Croix, and one morning I was performing down there and was sitting out by the pool reading my Bible, having a morning Bible study, and Wolfman came out and sat down in the lounge chair, plopped down in it beside me. And he said, "Why are you so happy?" And I said, "Well, it's because of Christ." And I said, "Wolf, you can know that joy as well." And so we had a really good opportunity to talk about the Lord. Loretta Lynn and I had a great conversation about the Bible. In fact, she was discouraged at that time. We were opening up for her, but that's not why she was discouraged, but I think it was
all
her.
I could get is this Elvis guy.
That's right. No, but I think her lead guitar player had come to Christ, and he was leaving the road. He'd been on the road with her for years, and she loved him. And she loved him not only as a musician, but as a dear friend.
Yeah.
And anyhow, he and I talked backstage for quite some time, and she said, Bruce, she said, can you talk to him about staying, with us? And I said, well, you can't, you don't really want to take that away from him. I said, the Lord's laid that on his heart. I said, the Lord will, put somebody else in your path.
Yeah.
But I said, don't deny him that. And she said, no, I wouldn't. But it was interesting to have just that conversation with her, not as this country superstar. There were probably 22,000 people waiting to hear us all perform. And but just to have that conversation with a sister in Christ who was truly hurting because she felt like she was going to lose a friend.
Mm-hmm.
But I said, you're not losing a friend. But I said, I get why you're sad. But I said, you don't want to deny him that opportunity to minister as well. So
Man, it's fascinating. It's amazing the stories of the people in the State House. Like, you would have never guessed in a million years, Bruce, if you just shook hands with somebody as a representative, they would have never guessed, like, oh my gosh, this guy has toured with Loretta Lynn, worked with Wolfman Jack, been on Letterman. And I mean, it's just cool the different, there's so many unique stories in 150 legislators, right? I think that's one of the things that stood out to me this session is they're all individuals, they're all unique, they all have their personal stories.